and Thailand, held leadership positions in the private sector, including an advocate and grab, and served as an elected representative under the Future Forward Party.
Correct.
Now, as many of you will know very well, this year's elections. Okay. Well, this year's elections were Thailand's first since 2014, and with the Move Forward Party having won a majority of the popular votes and 152 seats in the 500-seat House of Representatives, Ita would have been the country's 30th Prime Minister and its youngest, I believe.
Not the youngest.
Oh, not
the youngest in a few decades, but not the youngest.
Oh.
And it's 151 out of 500 in the last election. If people are watching it, then
yeah.
People will say,
But between May, when Thais went to the polls, and the end of August, the Move Forward Party came up against a series of dramatic challenges. You yourself, Peter, faced...
The poll was in May 14.
Yes.
And the coalition lasted for about 3-4 months, where we won the election with about 40% in terms of, 38% to be precise, in terms of popular vote, because it's a two-ballot system. It's a district and a party list and a parliamentary system. For the party list, we got 38%, so we came number one. And we were trying to form a coalition in the lower house, which I did, of 312. But then in Thailand, because of the previous constitution that was drafted by the military junta, it has to be a joint parliamentary session between the lower house and the upper house. The lower house is elected, the upper house, the senators are appointed, and it has to be a simple majority, which is 500 and 250, that's 750, so you need 376 of the majority. But when it was, and you could vote many times, there's no constitutional limit to how many times you can vote. And I actually quoted in America that you voted 15 times for the speaker. And 24, 25, so like 13 senators voted for me, but there was a quorum issue, so senators just simply didn't show up. About 50 of them didn't show up. So 50 out of 250 didn't show up. I think that's one of the main reasons why the first vote didn't go as per my expectation. But I'm temporarily suspended because during the second vote, then I got constitutional hardballs. Suspended on technicality on a defunct media share company of 0.00001% that my father owned. So that's why I'm here. So it's a good chance for me to reconnect Thailand's the policy community here in Washington, D.C., and hopefully I can explore some potential together between Thailand, ASEAN, and America.
Well, a lot of numbers, but basically what it's meant is that, as you pointed out, what the Thai electorate voted for is not what we have in government in Thailand today. And we're absolutely thrilled to have you here to unpack some of those complexities, not just from within Thailand, but also what it means for the US-Thai alliance and the world. So before we get into it, Peter, what we'll do is we'll speak for about 30-35 minutes and then open it up to the audience. The room is packed. I'm sure a lot of people online have questions too. If you're in the room, there is a card that should be at your seat. Please use a QR code to submit your questions. They will appear on my iPad here. And similarly, those of you watching online, if you can submit your questions, they will also magically appear on my iPad, and I will ask you those questions, Peter.
Sure.
So let's start with the political temperature in Thailand.
Yes.
You campaign for Move Forward on a platform of 3 Ds: demilitarize, demonopolize, and decentralize.
Yes, in a nutshell. If we have 30 minutes, that would be the things that I felt like that would supercharge the economy, and also something that would supercharge the structural reform that Thailand needed for the current global affairs.
Yeah, and the party platform also included a reform of the country's lèse majesté laws.
Legal amendment, yes.
So while this manifesto evidently appealed to the Thai electorate in terms of how it translated into votes, you came up against some very staunch conservative forces in Thailand. So what is the national sentiment like now that the political scenario has consolidated? Is Thailand divided? And what does that mean for the Thai-led coalition?
Friction of two forces. That's how I would frame it in a sentence. There's definitely consensus we're building at the top 1%. So, after military junta, and then they colluded with Thai to form a coalition. It's almost like an extension of the military regime. And because of that, there was consensus among conservatives and elites up top in order to form the government, despite having to break the political accountability, what they promised to the voters. So that's one consensus. After 17 years of clashes between the red shirts and the yellow shirts, and the so-called conservatives that despite corruption, as well as the red shirts that hate military coups and double standards. So that ended it, and it became the current government. That's one consensus up top. But also at the bottom, I feel like there's political realignment of people who were in either sides of the camp before a move forward came along. And they felt like it's not just, the divide is not just left or right or their previous factions of thinking, but now it's almost like, okay, let's together that. That's the only reason why I move forward one. So that's now the consensus of the people. So the consensus up top and the consensus at the bottom. And then there's a friction to that all the time on a daily basis. So I would say that the divide is not horizontal, but it's more like a vertical to sum up your question.
So what does that mean for the government moving forward in trying to cohere some of those frictions?
Well, there'll be a lot of resistance to follow up on things that they wanted to get done. You can see a couple of things that couldn't come through, not just the promise of who to form the government with, but their flagship policies like the digital wallet, giving out price of about $300 per head to jumpstart the economy, but that couldn't come through much because of all the support. It could be argued that in a leadership, when you form a government, leadership is either you have the authority to do it, or you have the legitimacy to do it, or you have both. But not winning an election, that you get a chance to govern, you definitely have the authority, and I have zero. But the legitimacy of people who voted for what they were promised on, and the ideas of how to use taxpayers' money, how do you prioritize things, how do you combat, how do you minimize energy and food waste and green urban areas. There's different ways of doing that. And obviously they're going to have some inertia in how to get it implemented and make it happen for the government. But as an opposition, I'm trying to be constructive, and I put people of Thailand right in the center. And if there's anything that I could help, something that we can debate, something that I can offer alternative Thailand to them, that's what I do. So I'm not gonna try to overthrow the government every day. That's not what we're trying to do here. I have time, I can wait. I don't know if people are can wait, but I can. I'm trying my best.
We'll get into that a little more, but you had mentioned jump-starting the economy, and I think the economy is top of most political leaders' minds in Southeast Asia, including in Thailand. And Prime Minister Srettha Thavisin has been going around the world, including the major powers of China and the United States, trying to drum up investment and economic support. Thailand, we spoke a little bit just now, has been this key node in the semiconductor supply chain, and has arguably benefited from some of the tensions between the US and China on the tech front. Do you see this still, the semiconductor industry, as a key part of Thailand's economy? And what are some of the other opportunities for Thailand to grow its economy in the near term?
Well, ASEAN, okay, let me give you a bit of context for the viewers back at home in terms of our economy. So we're the second largest, about half a trillion US dollars in terms of absolute size. But we're the second slowest in terms of growth for the past 10 years. That should tell you something. The second largest in size, but the second slowest in growth. For the past 10 years, almost like a lost decade in China. And the question is dependent on who you ask because of the level of inequality in Thailand is so vast right after COVID too. So if you ask if the economy is good, it might be good for the 1%, but for the 99%, they feel like they absolutely have nothing much left to do. Now, the second part of your question is central around the semiconductor industry. And within ASEAN, it's definitely a prime target for friendshoring after the Sino-American rivalry. But within that ASEAN region, it happens to be Malaysia that gets the opportunity to capitalize on that friendshoring, especially Penang. I remember sitting with the governor, and he said 40% of Malaysian incoming foreign direct investment is semiconductor, and 40% of that is out of the entire Malaysia, and the FDI grew 4 times right after COVID. So in order for you to benefit something that comes from this conflict, you have to have the human resources, the talent that speak 2 languages, both Chinese and Americans. I spoke to Morris Chang of TSMC back in APEC last year, where I sat next to him, and he said, clean water is something that is very important, not even in Arizona, that he thought it was quite possible for a high-tech nano chip technology. If you don't have that kind of clean water in those countries, it's kind of hard for you to benefit it. And also, comparing, the third piece is when you compare to Vietnam, where Synopsys and NVIDIA of America just invested something, and also Meta of Facebook also invested something, or promised to invest something in Vietnam after President Biden visit. So if I give you all these jigsaws, it's kind of hard for Thailand to be in the competition even within the ASEAN region. We still have that kind of incumbent advantage, but the growth is not there. So the way out of this elephant can't dance dilemma for semiconductor as well is to find a niche. And the answer to that, in short, is silicon carbide. Silicon carbide is power electronics that used to distribute power for electronic vehicles and solar cell panels. It's something that is too small for Americans and Indians and Japanese to pay attention to, but it's big enough to move along the incumbent industry when it comes to electronics. So I mean, 30 minutes, I don't have time to tell you why I came up with that answer, but it's something that is relevant to the current industries, EV and solar cell management, and it's also something that we can compete because it doesn't require a lot of upfront capex. When CHIP Act was online, and I look at the Japanese of how much they want to subsidize, and the Indians of how much they want to subsidize when it comes to this industry, and I looked at my own budget, it's like minuscule. So in order for you to have a location or a position, competitive position within this value chain, I argue that we really have to find that niche that is synchronized with our current capabilities as well as the external demands when it comes to these things.
So let me follow up the economic piece with asking you the question about whether Thailand intends to use economics, trade and investment as a way to leverage the US-China tensions? Or is there kind of a longer-term, more comprehensive strategy to navigate these major power tensions? Because it seems as though in Southeast Asia, the focus has narrowly been on economics and trying credibly and valuably to grow the economy domestically within Southeast Asia. what is Thailand's longer-term strategy to navigate these tensions between the major powers?
Well, we have to ask what the goal is of what's happening today, yesterday, and also 1,000 days ago when there was a Myanmar coup. Today is the 1,000th day anniversary of the coup. Peaceful Asia, if that's really what's at stake for you and me and America and China also, if peaceful Asia is the goal, then where is Thailand in that picture? If Thailand is 67 million and rarely mentioned, in terms of relevancy in foreign affairs or in international trade or even in security, we've been a U.S. allies for 190 years, to be precise, almost 200 years. But it was mainly security alliance through copper and gold. And in the past, before, it was about international trade and globalization and investment. But I think it's time to recalibrate away from those two previous pillars. And if IPEF is something that President Biden wants, and I follow it regularly, it was in September in Bangkok, it just concluded in KL, and they're coming over to San Francisco next month. If it's about infrastructure, if it's about anti-corruption, if it's about trade, if it's about labor rights, let's do that. That's something that we can recalibrate the relationship between Thailand and America away from the tension. And if we can do that and sort out our domestic affairs and started to work together with Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines, and all the 5 founding members to really make sure that ASEAN centrality is back on track, because that will become a middle power that can navigate the kind of either strategic competition that is going on, so that is a mutual benefit to all. But otherwise, it will continue to be polarized. And if we think that we're a small country, and if we don't get to stick together and get a division on how to push 5-point consensus forward, for example, it's continue to be less credibility, a less credible ASEAN to many, and I guess that's why we see a lot of official visits only to a particular country like Vietnam rather than the ASEAN summit as a whole. So I would argue that Thailand has a role to play to make sure that we sort out our domestic affairs, and then we step up to become a middle power in the rule-based world order, and then ASEAN as well together, so that we can balance things out a bit.
You brought up ASEAN centrality. There's been a lot of hand-wringing, as you well know, from within Southeast Asia about what ASEAN centrality means. What does that mean to you?
Relevancy and credibility. Relevancy, if you ask people of various countries, there's actually a survey of you asking people in each country what ASEAN means to you. Is that relevant? Is that important to be in ASEAN? Would it benefit your lives? And the answer is very low. And also relevancy to the world, and also the credibility, which is something that is up to the expectation of the future, as well as the historical achievements that ASEAN has achieved in the past. So it's really that kind of trajectory that we wanted to do, but I would argue that if Thailand is absent from that, then it's very hard for you to move something.
So relevancy both to Southeast Asians and to the rest of the world.
And to the people.
To the people. First
because foreign affairs is something that is very distant to the Thai borders. Even if they have to pay a hefty price of fertilizer of what happened in Russia, Ukraine, 30,000 laborers in Israel-Hamas conflict at the moment, and also the border that we share with Myanmar, as well as the economic migrants, as well as the investments inside. If we don't get involved with foreign affairs, we'll continue to get the cost of not participating, but not benefiting anything from it. And we can't do it alone. We're not President Jokowi visiting Russia and Ukraine simultaneously, but if it's 5 leaders of ASEAN together for in times when international peace is fragile and fleeting, I think it would make more sense.
Or 10 ASEAN leaders.
10.
ideally.
At 5 at the minimum and 10 as a whole.
Right. So I think ASEAN has been a bit of a disappointment, particularly to the citizens of Myanmar.
Yes.
And you brought up Myanmar earlier on.
Yes.
When you were campaigning earlier this year, you voiced support for ASEAN's 5-point consensus.
Mhm.
Is that still your position now, given the intractability of the situation?
I feel like it has to be 5-point consensus that is turned into a 5-year roadmap, so that there's something tangible to be think through it. Because ASEAN Chairmanship next year will be with Laos. It's only 1 year, so there's even if they have troika for the Myanmar issue, but there's no. Good. But there's no continuation in the way you do things, so there's nothing concrete. And the people of Myanmar are suffering, so we have to start with like humanitarian economic corridor, humanitarian economic nexus that allows demonopolization of military and military between borders to include public health officials, educators, and those in need for humanitarian aid as well as economic aid, just to make sure that there's a first step to reverse the status quo issue for the past 1,000 days.
5 years would be a bit too long, some would say.
But it's been 1,000 days already. It's just nothing of a laughing matter, but the people are really suffering. And there's like political arrests happening just a few days ago. Information minister was arrested for that. And I would say that it's really important for ASEAN. It's really important for Thailand. It's really important for the global world order as well.
So we're in Washington, D.C., and obviously I have to bring up the U.S.-Thai alliance. You mentioned 190 years of relations between the countries since the signing of the Siamese-American Treaty of Amity and Commerce.
Yes.
But some would say the treaty alliance has floundered somewhat in recent years, and there are some in this town who think that Thailand has moved slightly closer to China. And of course, Prime Minister Srettha has recently invited President Putin to Thailand. What are we to make of Thai foreign policy?
Or if it was me, then I would think of the way to revive our foreign policy, to rebalance and to recalibrate, just like how I mentioned, because of the over-reliance on a particular side back when it was really
มันส่งไม่ได้ค่ะ ถ้าอย่างนั้น
various
ขอปิดไล
countries
ฟ์
that
นี้
were
เปลี่ยนไปไล
strong
ฟ์ยูทูบ
allies,
จะไม่
strong alliance of Thailand turned away. But now that that era, even though extended, but yet we're allowed to re-enter the international affairs. So when we do that, we have to do it with caution, and we do it with a balanced approach. We'll do it like in a la carte and not a buffet, so rule-based one, rather than sticking to sides if they're our friends that's doing something that is against the rule-based diplomacy that says right makes might, not might makes right. Then we'll call it off. But if it's our foes that are suffering, then we also have to engage them as well. Make sure that
จะซูมมีแต่คนบอกอยากเห็นหน้าใกล้
but I wouldn't want to be out of balance. That is not
ๆก็เลยจะถามคนนี้
Do you think Thailand is out of balance?
it's been
มันซูมไม่ได้
out of balance. And I'll speak to that not in a technocratic or diplomatic way, but because I'm a member of parliament, and when I visit
มีเก้าอี้
rural areas, when it comes to green economy, just an example of turning waste into energy, and for the past 10 years, people should be happy when they see this kind of investment coming into the local economy, but they're very upset of the poor anti-environment investments that were the only option back in the country. So I think we would think on behalf, I would say on the behalf of Thai people that are welcoming a diverse range of technologies and goodwill and potential that they explore together for the mutual benefit of various countries rather than being overall reliant on a particular country.
Well, Thailand, of course, hosted APEC last year, and we have APEC coming up very soon in San Francisco. The Bangkok Declaration, if I remember correctly, spoke about biocircular green model,
BCG economy.
BCG economy.
Okay.
How does that translate locally on the
Okay.
ground? Has it been successful?
เดินไปไม่ได้เขาไม่
You got to walk the talk. That's my answer. And I remember on top of my head, I'm thinking aloud for you, so please forgive me. So they have a BCG 6-year plan of about 40 billion baht. Billion baht. You divided that by year, that's about 7 billion baht. The entire budget is 3.3 trillion. So if I do my calculus very quickly, 7 billion divided by 3.3 trillion is 0.001%. So when you do it on a Bangkok Declaration, which gets international audience, it's a good talk. But when you look at the national budget of 0.0001% supporting BCG economy, you don't walk the talk. And I would argue that, if you were to follow up through your commitment of Bangkok Declaration, it has to be financially, like how I presented to you. I'll give you the numbers. Legally also, that a lot of laws have to be put in place. Transnational Haze Act, Clean Air Act that we follow from the American example and the Singaporean example. All of that were kicked out by the Prime Minister. That was not even discussed in the Parliament. So if you really want to show the international community that you mean business, you got to make sure that you reallocate the national budget from taxpayers' money that are suffering from all these climate change issues to be at the right proportion, as well as allowing the laws to be discussed in the Parliament. But these are the things, just a short example, short, concise, and crisp examples of not walking the talk when it comes to BCG economy.
And I'm sure you'll do a good job of checking that in opposition now. But so when we started, the questions had already started coming in.
All right.
So I'm going to get to those questions.
Okay, let's open the floor.
So first question is, you've mentioned several times that you have time and you are patient in waiting for these longer term reforms for Thailand to take place. The question is, in the future, for the next election, would you consider changing your strategy and pushing slower, more incremental reforms in order to hopefully win? Or do you think the message of reforming the military, economy, and 112 are all equally important?
What's the first part of the question again?
Would you consider changing your
I
strategy?
have time. Well, I have time, but they have everything. Everything else is on their side. It's gerrymandering, electoral calculations, finance, all these things that I'm a 3-year-old party, and also, first time leading an election. So even if I have time and I have the people's support, that doesn't mean that it's a guarantee that I win next time. So that follows logically to the second part of your question. Yes, I have to re-strategize, and it will be a cadenced approach. Some has to be heavy and fast, some has to be slow and light. So that will be something that we need to do, and making sure that people who is part of that change don't get left behind. It has to be an inclusive strategy, inclusive growth, and it takes time, not just winning elections, but also dominating ideas, explaining the win-win solutions and why we need to demonopolize or why we need to decentralize. And third part of your question is whether we're going too fast. People of Thailand have spoken, radical is the new normal. And I would argue that it's actually too little too late comparing to what we are facing, whether it's pandemic, whether it's climate change, whether it's digital disruption, whether it's aging society, whether it's cybersecurity. All these things cannot be swiftly carried out by a central government in Bangkok. And also in terms of economy, you can't really use the same model of trickle-down economics of supporting just the large conglomerates and use the law as a legal barrier to entry for the SMEs to participate in all those industries, whether it's energy or whether it's beverage, like liquor liberalization, for example. So those things, I would argue that is actually it has been too little, too late. But there's various things that we probably need to obtain more alignment or something that is way too slow to get things done.
So you have time, but not really. You have time, but you don't really have time.
When I say I meant myself personally.
Okay.
But then again, it's a collective. Politics is collective action, right? It's who gets what when, and it's the entire country, ASEAN, and as well as international community also.
There's a related question. What do you think is the most important reform for civil society within Thailand to focus on changing now in the post-election context?
Political and
Civil society.
Political and educational. One of the first things that I promised or we promised in the 100-day agenda is constitutional amendment. It's really the top hierarchy of law. It's about how you get into power. It's how you govern. It's a checks and balance of power. And that was written by military supported groups after the military coup. So we wanted to make sure that the constitution is by the people, for the people, with the people also. But that is being pushed back by the current government by having another studies after studies and after studies. So that's something that I think is something that is of priority. And also our education system in terms of budget that is being input, in terms of the time of the students that is being used in the system is number 1 in ASEAN, but we're number 45 in PISA score, for example. So there's absolutely something wrong within that system where our input is really like this and the output is like this. And we can't keep up with the changing, complex, increasingly contested world. And that's really the basis of all the investment and all those things that are required when compared to Vietnam.
Another question about reform.
Okay.
Seeing as both Mr. Thanathorn and yourself were barred from elections for similar reasons pertaining to media shares, do you see any need for the reform of asset declaration laws or the Anti-Corruption Commission? If so, what would that reform be?
Well, these things are, according to Harvard professors, called constitutional hardballs, which means that when you follow the law by sentence without thinking about the intention of the law. For my case, as my father's shareholding 17 years ago, the media company is defunct, and it does not have any revenue from the media industry. It doesn't have a license in terms of media license, and I hold 0.0001%, and I certainly didn't get any political advantage. Nobody voted for me from appearing from ITV debates or speeches. So if you look at the intention of the law for stopping people from using media to their political advantage, I would argue that's okay, because I don't want any media mogul to become prime minister just because he owns shares in the media outlet to his advantage. But it's really a free and fair trial rule of law that is not double standards. Because some of the MPs hold the same share as me, but they're fine. But when it's me, and it happens to be right in the middle of second vote of prime minister, don't you think that's a bit of a coincidence? So that's what I'm trying to get at.
Okay.
It's like a few minutes before getting into a session of selecting the prime minister, and then the constitutional court order comes right into the parliament. So
I'm sure your popularity had nothing to do with it. A question about Myanmar.
But we'll see in January, though. I think that's when the verdict will come, and I feel like I have personal and professional evidence that will ensure that I return to Parliament and serve you guys.
We'll keep an eye out for that. What do you want to see the new Thai government do next on Myanmar?
At the very minimum, establish humanitarian economic corridor and allowing the necessary humanitarian aids to enter each sites. I want to see, at the very minimum, inside-out perspective, in case you don't care about human rights, but there's economic opportunities that comes from what's going on, to really take care of the the people of Myanmar better, at least non-refoulement basis, for example. People of Myanmar is top 3 in terms of real estate customers in the previous year, and also there's doctors and educators that have completed the violence area. At least Thailand should take care of them better, or at least these doctors and teachers can really help their own people within that border area. I would want to see the government to be the central part of ASEAN leaders to drive 5-point consensus into 5-year roadmap that return democracy to the Myanmar people at their own pace and at their own liberty, rather than interfering in their domestic businesses. Inclusive dialogue of all parties, I would argue that it would be of more beneficial to Thailand as a whole.
Including with the
Energy
including with the ethnic
and ethnic minorities.
There's another domestic related question. One of the main reasons of Move Forward Party's development strategy is decentralization.
Okay.
I think your party swept 32 out of 33 seats in Bangkok. Is that right? You can fact check me.
We left out one, so
Okay.
I think it's either 32 out of 33 or 33 out of 34 because of electoral changes, but I remember the one that we missed.
So almost clean sweep.
Yes.
Now, given that, how do you suggest that decentralization of power and resources happen away from Bangkok?
Mhm.
Is it through providing incentives for businesses to move out of Bangkok, or by changing how Thailand does elections on a provincial scale, or both?
Latter before the former. I mean, you have to start introducing linkages between the people in governance and people through elections. Currently, governor of 76 provinces in Thailand are appointed by the Ministry of Interior, and they have the average working life in each province of 1.5 years. So if you take an average 1.5 years, you could get a mayor of Chiang Mai from down south. It doesn't necessarily someone who's from that region, and they get rotated every 1.5 years. So arguably, no matter how high of a personal, professional capacity of that governor is, I mean, you're not from that region, you don't know the strength and the weakness and the opportunities and threats and assets and liability of that region, of the cultural norms. And then you get moved when you get to settled and you started to understand. So I would argue the latter before the former, through elections and making sure that they're linked to the people. And if they do a good job, they stay. If they don't do a good job, then they get out through elections. And once that happens, some financial autonomy is important. So it's not just getting taxes from local areas or regional areas into Bangkok, and Bangkok decides how to appropriate the budget back to that area. If that happens, I think you will have adequate human resources, adequate financial resources, and also the parliament will act as a legal enabler for you to really get things done. Wildfire that happened in this area, it's the same for Chiang Mai. But if you don't have the budget, if you don't have the appropriate gear, and you don't have the legal authority to tackle the issue, why you have to wait for Bangkok to think of how to act to do. So that's why the issue never gets solved.
So you mentioned the lost decade of Thailand. It appears that the focus of Thai leadership has been oriented domestically, and a limited number of party leaders in the last election had a robust foreign policy plan. What potential does Thailand have to be a regional leader, and what steps are required to get there?
Well, in the past, if foreign policy is a reflection of domestic policy, if you don't have the legitimacy inside because you come from a military coup and you want to talk about democracy and human rights to other people, it's like preaching to someone that there's no credibility. So if you want to really act up as a regional player, you want to make sure that domestic affairs is taken care of first. So when you talk about environmental backup declaration or human rights in any other countries, but domestically with what's going on around in terms of social media, people know. So it's very hard for you to have some credibility so that people listen to you.
Credibility. U.S. defense and security officials often note that the U.S. has 5 treaty allies, but spend much of their time talking about Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, increasingly, and Australia. Do you think Thailand is overlooked in these discussions? And if so, what issues do you think the U.S. and Thailand should focus on?
So that's why I'm here, to put Thailand back in the radar. But rightly so, because, out of that past 10 years, you're middle power, you're large, but you don't grow, and you didn't participate in a lot of international arena trajectories, and that's why you're left out. And when you're left out and no credibility, and when you want to maneuver something to a mutual benefit, that's why it's very hard, and all your people have to be the sufferer of all these spillover from not being able to manage anything. So soybean prices, fertilizer prices, energy prices, the labor within South Korea and Finland and Israel. These things, if you're not active, that's why you don't get to actively manage all your problems that are being faced domestically.
I can put you on the spot. What would your top 3 foreign policy priorities be with regard to the U.S.-Thai alliance?
Well, to any other countries, not just U.S., the framework is 3 R's: revive, rebalance, and recalibrate, as I mentioned. I actually answered the questions before you're putting me on the spot, that to rebalance, it requires mutual consensus, both from Thailand and from America. I mean, arguably, there were times, because I was an American student since 1999, so at least before I get into politics, I got involved with Americans in Thailand or diplomatic people in Thailand, and I actually felt the absence during some time here as well, that the Americans were absent within Thailand, and also because of our military situation, that we look somewhere else. But now it's time that we revive that kind of relationship that goes beyond copper gold security alliance and like export and import. And definitely IPEF of the agenda that President Biden is trying to push. I look at it in details. It's a comprehensive framework. It's something that rings a bell. But after that negotiation, and then we're lifting all those standards on supply chain resilience, on digital infrastructure, then what next? I mean, it will be good for the people because of its higher standards, and it will fend off incoming poor direct investment from any other parts of the world. But who pays for that upgrade, and what kind of assistance is being provided from the U.S. so that the Thais can really realize that there is a better option. But as of now, for the past 10 years, we have our problems, we have our threats, but we don't have the technology. And because of that limited relationship that we have to look somewhere for that technology, even if it's poor, even if it's not environmental friendly. But now, it was my government that we started to have options from all around the world and trying to recalibrate with you on your IPEF. Then we really need to go beyond the negotiation of advice and consulting to something that is materialized, something that is tangible, that people can really view the difference of when American is absent or American is present within the country.
You're pretty upbeat about IPEF. That's not really been the sentiment here in Washington all the time. But if you were Prime Minister, one of the questions reads, how would you approach China differently?
Well, I think it's important that we still have to continue to engage China with the proximity, with the linkages between two countries, but I'll think of myself not a small little brother or something like that, but also a middle power that can come up with a structured way of engagement that will benefit both the people of China and also the people of Thailand. There are things that we feel like we owe to the Chinese assistance, especially on digital infrastructure, cloud computing and things like that. They are very up to speed in terms of advancement, but there's also a lot of issues that came from immigration, also retail occupation in various areas, and also our value chains when it comes to tourism is being moved away from Thailand to the Chinese infrastructure, such as digital wallets, such as coming of tourists. But let me be clear, we welcome the arrival of the Chinese investments in tourism and people. It's just that some, not all, that will become problems that related to drugs and human trafficking and things like that. But that's part of the things that we need to do together between Thailand and China.
One of the points of your campaign platform is demilitarization. Can you speak a little about the situation in the south of Thailand now and what that means going forward with the new government, please?
Down south has been a conflict for more than 2 decades with like $500 billion of budget that is being used to try to foster peace. Also one of the youngest population, so public policy school right here in America. I looked at all the data of all the provinces that is younger than me, and it happens to be down south. So they're looking for a future of self-determination, something of tolerance, something of diversity, that they can determine their own religious faith as well as developments. It's one of the poorest areas in Thailand. So when we were campaigning for 2 things, first is torture and forced disappearance to go away from Thailand for good, and second is decentralization, the ability to self-determine. These are the 2 things that jive with the borders, though not enough. It's still one of my prioritized areas to solve the problems and also to win elections and win their hearts in order to make sure that it's no longer about national security, but about human security. That's ability to get jobs, education, public health. Because if you look at it per capita basis, down south is always the poorest, the most unequal.
So there's a question here that says, Peter says he has time, but I have no time. So my question is, when will we know the result of your case, and what is your expected outcome?
I can't speak for the Constitutional Court, but roughly speaking, if you compare it to any other cases, and the legal procedure, it should be sometime in January.
What current day or historical global political leaders you respect most and wish to emulate if you become Thailand's Prime Minister in the future?
Pepe of Uruguay. It's probably because I have a roommate based here in DC and he's Uruguayan, and he kept showing me all the good things that happened, and also Pepe was on Netflix during the time. So yeah, definitely something that is that I look up to at the superficial level. Secondly, would be Lee Hsien-loong is also someone who navigated the world pretty swiftly, especially in the past 3 or 4 years. Also, Kennedy alumni. So.
You have had a career in tech, and as a Thai citizen, and Thailand has been through quite a bit in terms of the climate crisis this year alone.
Yeah.
The people are talking about kind of
สวัสดีค่ะ
these twin
เดี๋ยว
forces
ป้าเอ็ม
of
จะปิดไล
the
ฟ์
green
นี้
tech wave
จะ
as
ไป
well
ไล
as
ฟ์
the
ยู
high
ทู
tech
บ
wave.
ช่อง
How do you
อิ่ม
see
เอม
the
สุข
two
ใจนะคะ
together in Thailand. There's a lot of talk about
YouTube
digitalization
มัน
on
จะ
the
ซู
one
ม
hand.
ได้
There's a lot of talk about
ถ้าใครอยาก
the
ชมต่อ
promises
ไป
of
ที่ช่อง
climate technology
อิ่ม
on
เอ
the
ม
other
สุข
hand.
ใจนะ
But
คะ
some would say that green tech is not always green, particularly in its processing.
Yeah, greenwashing.
That's right. And the two are often treated quite separately in many Southeast Asian countries.